4 years ago, a young prostitute was savagely murdered inside this house. After the longest murder trial in British history, 3 men were sentenced to life imprisonment. But growing controversy surrounds the case, fueled by persistent allegations that the police investigation may have been flawed. Tonight, Panorama examines disturbing new evidence and asks whether this could be the latest in a series of unsafe convictions. Cardiff, 1988, a changing city, its horizons expanding as much of the old docklands in Tiger Bay loses its notoriety to the developers' shiny new structures. But in one street in Butte Town, the past still clings stubbornly to the damp streets. On February the 15th, 1988, someone walked through the door of this house to keep an appointment upstairs. Then climbed to the first floor flat, which was being used as a brothel. Inside the darkened bedroom, Lynette White, a young prostitute, was waiting. There were screams and then silence. Lynette White's fully clothed body was found 20 hours later. She'd been dragged to the floor between the bare bed and the window. There was an unused condom and money on her bed. An arc of bloodstains had sprayed against the wall and bed. An unidentified palm print was found on the wallpaper. There were further bloodstains under the window and on the skirting board. Blood that was not the victim's had been found smeared on the bottom of her jeans. She had been stabbed over 50 times in a frenzied attack. All the evidence suggested that neither sex nor robbery were obvious motives.
We had a call in the evening, and I drove down by car with my colleague, and in the corner nearest the window was the body of a girl with obviously very severe injuries and a lot of blood about. I think she had her throat cut more than once because it was a very ragged wound with multiple tails on the neck wound, and either before that, but probably after that, she had multiple stab wounds, some of which were inevitably after she was well and truly dead, because it didn't bleed at all.
For nearly a year, Butte Town was gripped by nervous apprehension as police grappled with the mystery. Then suddenly, South Wales detectives charged 5 local men with the slaying. All denied the accusation. 3 were sentenced to life and 2 were found not guilty and freed. But the release of Ronald Actie after 2 years on remand was only the beginning of a new chapter in the story.
Person killed Lynette White and out on the street. Still walking the street. They walk in the street. They are innocent men in there. Innocent men.
It was like being born again, you know. They've given me my freedom back. You know, I've been in there for 2 years. It was like living in hell for 2 years. 2 years, like the end of the world, you know. Everything is on top of you, everything against you. And then, I mean, to just suddenly be released like that, it was just something else. It was special, you know, a very special day. Happiest day of my life.
When his cousin John Actie emerged from court to a similar emotional welcome, the questions which had plagued the whole investigation began to be asked with greater urgency. Since the Actie cousins were found not guilty, controversy has grown around the case. This was a murder in which the police were unable to produce a credible motive. There was no forensic evidence against the accused. The prosecution had to rely on witnesses who were admitted liars and a confession obtained by debatable methods. Next month there'll be an appeal asking, in essence, whether the convictions of all 3 men are really safe. But the case has wider implications still. After a series of convictions depending on uncorroborated confessions were revealed as notorious miscarriages of justice, the law was changed to strengthen the rights of suspects under police interrogation. The new rules, known as PACE, were enforced during the South Wales police investigation. But a closer look at the evidence suggests the pace safeguards may have failed in this case. South Wales CID have declined to assist in the making of this film.
High from the line, lady, check out the house, big, bloody.
Cardiff Docks Butte Town community has shrunk to an enclave of just a few thousand. Time still bows to working-class tradition in a waterfront village of large extended families. There is a long history of racial harmony here. Many locals have gone to the suburbs, others stubbornly resist change. The sons of Caribbean cooks and Somali stokers live in a Butte town that still retains its spirit, but little of the wealth of its earlier mercantile greatness. There is some crime here, but the apparently motiveless murder of a young prostitute shocked the neighborhood. Prostitute murders are often difficult to solve. There are too many casual contacts, too much furtive behavior. But in Cardiff, detectives led by a CID chief with an unbroken record of solving murders had an early lead. Witnesses had seen an obvious suspect right outside the murder house within hours of the killing.
We got out of the car and we saw this strange-looking man just here. And he was obviously in a state, he was distressed, he was catching himself and appeared to be trying to hide his hand inside his coat. And his hand had blood on it, it was evidently injured.
This actor played the mysterious white suspect 3 months later when BBC's Crime Watch featured the murder. The man with blood on his hands was seen by several witnesses outside the dead girl's flat. As far as the police inquiry was concerned, there was then little doubt that he was their man.
The man seen virtually outside the flat which he used to take clients to must be the prime suspect. The man was mumbling, incoherent, I gather he was crying at times too, blood on his hands.
That is right. He certainly is a person who we must speak to at this time. He's about 35 to 40 years of age and between 5'8" and 6 foot tall. And we must remember that this man was bleeding himself, he's cut himself, he's also got blood on him from the deceased.
With the months passed, the white suspect was never found and the inquiry began to drag into investigative deadlock. There was no lack of cooperation, but no one in Butte Town seemed to know anything. Neither the traditional community nor the new arrivals, lured by smart new waterfront homes, wanted to inhabit a Butte Town over which hung the odium of an unsolved prostitute murder. Then quite suddenly, Cardiff police got a sensational break. In November, 3 key witnesses all came forward at the same time, told police that they'd lied in their original statements, and the 2 women confessed some involvement in the killing. They were a prostitute and close friend of the murdered girl, Leanne Vilday, Angela Pasila, another prostitute and former flatmate of Vilday's, and Mark Gromick, a petty criminal who lived in the flat above the dead woman. They named not the white suspect, but 5 black men. Ronald Actie, one of the well-known local faces in Butte Town. His cousin John Actie, also well-known and a man with previous criminal convictions. Tony Paris, another local man with only a shoplifting conviction behind him. Yusuf Abdullahi, Cardiff-born, a petty criminal. And Stephen Miller, a Londoner who was Lynette White's boyfriend. Of the 3 witnesses, the most important was Leanne Vilday, who now lives in hiding in Swansea. Vilday was a typical Butte Town prostitute, young, bisexual and feckless. Her face still bears the marks of a dispute with her lesbian lover. Like many of her colleagues, she lived a dangerous and unglamorous life. She knew all the 5 accused men, was the lover of one, had a child by the relative of another. She rented out the flat in which Lynette's body was found and actually led police to the body. Then she says she lied to them for 10 months before suddenly and inexplicably coming up with a version of the murder which helped send 3 men to prison for life. Vilday claimed that she and Pasila had heard Lynette's screams in their flat across the road and had run the 70 yards to the house. The front door was already open and they ran up the stairs. They passed John Actie at the top of the landing and went into the murder room where they saw Lynette White lying on the floor between the bed and the window. In the room, the 2 prostitutes saw Ronald Actie by the door and Abdullahi standing a few feet further inside the room by the bed. Miller and Paris were standing by Lynette White. Paris was stabbing her in the chest. John Actie then came into the room and someone passed a knife to him with which he threatened Vilde, ordering her to cut Lynette White's wrists so that she would become involved in the murder, forcing her to keep quiet. Priscilla was also ordered to mutilate Lynette. At one moment, Paul Atkins, who was visiting his friend Gromick upstairs, came into the murder room too, saw what was happening and left. So at various stages during this version of the crime, there were between 4 to 8 people in the small murder room. Vilde even implicated one completely innocent man, but later admitted that this was a lie made up only because she hated him.
What I am trying to say, the word I'm trying to say is that I am not gay and I am not normal. The word I am looking for is, well, nobody's normal. Anybody that was normal wouldn't be sat there looking at me now, would they? I mean...
Nothing in Butte Town is ever quite what it seems. Between the bingo and the drag queens, there is a life that constantly crosses the line.
I am greedy, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like one sex. Indeed, I do like both. I am what you call bisexual. That is the word I'm looking for. I am bisexual. Men and boys. It makes no difference to me whatsoever.
Leanne Vilde and the other witnesses against the defendants chose to live a life in which some compromise with the straight world was essential to survival. That, say the Butte Town locals, is the price prostitutes pay to stay on the streets. Leanne Vilde, say those who knew her well, was no exception to the rule.
She's a terrible liar. I mean, she's a prostitute. I mean, so they lie. They live a lie. They live a life of lies, you know. So it's nothing to stand up in court and lie.
Leanne Vilde's lover, Deborah Paul, another member of the gay community, was living with her at the time of the murder. They continued living together for 3 months afterwards. She recalls how Vilde complained about being constantly visited by murder squad detectives.
She just said, oh, some of the officers are really bugging me, like everywhere I go, they're there. You know, it was just sort of like, in a way, following her.
Do you think she had anything to do with the murder of Lynette White?
My personal opinion thinks she got... I've never seen her mad. I've never seen her have a fight. If she have had any arguments with the other prostitutes or punters or whatever, they've either just give her a little slap like and just left it. But I don't think she can't even punch a wet echo. She's not incapable of doing anything like that, I don't think.
In an environment like Butte Town, all prostitutes are vulnerable to pressure from authority. Few can walk the beat long without reaching an accommodation with the police. Knowledge is power, and the court heard that Vilde had been a paid police informer.
They used to say to me, well, how come she hasn't got picked up? And I say, well, I don't know, maybe she's an informer. Maybe just picking up just to go around the corner, tell them whatever and let out. But every time she used to say to me, oh, I got picked up, I used to say, well, where's your charge sheet then? Oh, I lost it. Oh, I'd lost it in the next punter's car or whatever. She used just to lie like, I believe she was a police informer.
But could she also have lied in court? Leanne Vilde will not talk to us on camera. Much of her story is impossible to check. However, she said the only reason she had run over to Lynette White's flat was because she heard her screaming 70 yards away. The police don't seem to verify this point, but we decided to put this claim to scientific test. We invited an actress into the murder flat. Independent acoustic consultants recorded her scream on tape and then arranged a playback through high-fidelity speakers, pointing from the murder room towards Vilde's flat.
No, that's fine. No, that's 116. Right, 115 at one.
Highly sensitive listening equipment was then taken the 70 yards over the road and into the third-floor flat, then occupied by Vilde and Angela Priscilla. The scream was then played back at normal level, passing through 2 sets of windows.
No. Anybody hear that?
Not a thing.
Can we repeat it at plus 10 dB, please?
Okay. Even with the flat window open, the scream was barely audible, and the engineers ignored the impact of surrounding noise that came from a nearby club on the night of the murder.
Okay, coming up any second.
Our tests showed that when we replayed the normal scream in this flat, it was not audible.
It was impossible to reconcile the scientific facts with the final statements of both Vilde and Priscilla. Even when the screams were amplified by a factor of 3, they were scarcely recognizable.
In this flat, we found that it was just about audible, but it just sounded like a muffled squeak. It's not the sort of thing that anyone would remark upon unless they were sitting very quietly, and we were listening out for it.
Vilde and Poseiler's truthfulness was crucial to the case against each of the 5 defendants. At the trial, even the judge noted that they were liars.
You have to do the best with what you've got, and witnesses come in all shapes and sizes, they come in all levels of credibility. And these, frankly, were awful witnesses, terrible witnesses. I would have been very unhappy to be taking a murder case. I would have been very unhappy to be taking a car parking case before the magistrates or the courts with witnesses like this.
First thing is, you can imagine how dark it would have been up here. Right? We invited the former Deputy Chief Constable of Manchester, John Stalker, himself a veteran of over 100 murder investigations, to visit the scene of the crime. This is the bedroom where it happened, okay? Now, the bed was out there. His immediate reaction was astonishment that there was no forensic evidence against any of the defendants. Scores of fingerprints were found, but they didn't match the accused men. Even a palm print made at the time of the murder remains unidentifiable.
My impression is that having begun with an open mind, as all good detectives do, that has slowly dropped away, the options have fallen away, it's become narrower and narrower. Until 10 months on, they only have one possible chance of solving this, and that is by interviewing and obtaining admissions. Because forensically, this case is a non-starter so far as the suspects are concerned. There are no good witnesses. All that there is in this case, if it happens, are admissions. That's all.
Armed with the new statements from Vilde, Poseiler and Gromick, South Wales detectives were ready by December to pick up the 5 suspects. When questioned, 4 of them were vehement in their denials and never gave way during prolonged questioning. Detectives then began to concentrate their interrogations on the 5th man, Stephen Miller, Lynette White's former boyfriend. Miller has a very low IQ and was psychologically assessed as being highly suggestible. The police interrogations with Miller took place over a 4-day period inside this station in the presence of a solicitor. They were tape recorded and lasted a total of some 14 hours. At first Miller denied involvement, but after nearly 13 hours of questioning, he made this statement.
At that time, I think Leanne came in. She started shouting. She said something to somebody. As far as I could recollect, she said something to somebody. She ran out. Then after that, all I had to do was tell you just went fucking crazy, man. So I started stabbing. You know what I mean?
Clearly, this was oppressive questioning over 19 interviews.
And oppressive within the definitions set by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act.
Oh yes, and I think that there are 2 things you can go along. Certainly oppression has been defined as behaviour which saps the will of the individual such that that individual says things they would otherwise not say, or doesn't say things which they otherwise would. So the sapping of the will, Lord Lane narrowed it down to actually going along with the Oxford English Dictionary definition, which was about burdensome behaviour. And of course, I think that fulfills the criterion for this set of interviews.
Dr. Eric Shepherd is a forensic psychologist who specialises in teaching ethical interrogation techniques to police forces throughout Britain. We asked him to analyse the Miller tapes and the statements of the key witnesses against him. By reducing the complex information into a pictorial dimension, Dr. Shepherd was able to spot the police techniques as they interrogated Miller.
Most people see oppression as something which is very loud, knockabout, shouting, swearing, screaming, shrieking, and that does occur, particularly in tape 7, where the officer completely loses his cool and it gets angry with him, shouts at Miller.
Oh, you could sit there and say that, being in that room, seeing that girl there in the state she was in, and you supposed to have had all this wonderful care for her, seeing a damn head hang off, and her arms cut, and stabbed to death, and you sit there and tell us you know nothing at all about it, nothing at all about it, how you can ever, I just don't know how you can sit there.
Dr. Shepherd noted that once Miller had been chastened in the interrogation, a new, friendlier team of detectives interviewed him. They began creating a scenario which tempted Miller into taking the first steps down a path which at first may have seemed safe for him, but ultimately led to his conviction for murder.
From tape 5 onwards, from interview 5, the police officer interviewing then, one of the two, suggests that he might be under the influence of drugs, blocked, and therefore he wouldn't remember anyway, would he? Now, although he rejects it then, that is the seed. That's the seed which then migrates into subsequent interviews.
I can't see any reason for you to want to do that unless you were completely out of your head on something stupid. And to the best of our knowledge, no one's ever seen you in a stupid state on coke. That might be the case, though. You might have been well blocked up, or you might have taken a bit too much or something like that.
In the interviews 8 and 9, the police officers paint what is a word picture of what could have happened, and he goes along with that. And in the subsequent interviews, they build upon that, and there is a very subtle form of shaping, such that Miller never gives them anything that he's never been given, if not by the two interviewing officers there, elsewhere. When he does hit a problem where he can't remember, he then hits the ultimate paradox, which is he can't give them detail that he doesn't have. So they have the problem then of him having to be shaped towards giving the next bit of information.
Don't interrupt, let me show you all the way through. Leanne said, I don't even live here. That's my flat over there. And all of a sudden, you know where her flat is. You know where Lynette might be. Yeah? You're angry. Because it's been building up through the week. You're with mates. They're geeing you up. Something gone on from there then? Into the flat. There she is. I'll give her slaps a few times. Whoop, a knife. Good idea to cut her. And then it goes wrong. It goes very, very wrong.
In 12, he fights back. And he basically says, I don't know why I've been bullshitting you in this way. And at that stage, the police officer comes back with, well, you could say, a very emotive, you're facing a long sentence if things go wrong here.
Why did you go with 6 other people to number 7 James Street that night?
Do you know what? You want to tell the truth, honest to God, right? I don't know what I've been bullshitting for, you know.
Let's hear it.
I didn't go with them, you know.
What?
I didn't go with them.
Let's have it.
I didn't go there. I know, as far as I'm concerned, right? I'm looking at my frigging life, right? As
You
far as
are.
I'm concerned, right?
You are.
As far as I'm
You're looking at a
concerned.
life sentence
Yeah,
if this goes wrong.
I know. I admit that I was there.
Right.
Right?
Now, I have to say, it gives me no great pleasure to do it, but the solicitor in this case, in my view, let the client down badly. There were countless occasions when he should and could have objected to the way in which the interview was taking place. There was numerous occasions when he could and should have interfered. Out of common fairness, it didn't need legal knowledge, it was just obvious that the man was being browbeaten, in my view.
Miller's confession led to his conviction, and although the jury was repeatedly warned to ignore it as evidence against the other 4 defendants, they clearly couldn't put it out of their minds. Miller was bitter as he went to prison. Yusuf Abdullahi also received a life sentence, as did Tony Paris. If the Miller confession is unsafe, how would that leave the case against Yusuf Abdullahi? Abdullahi's defense was based on an alibi. He said he spent the entire night of the murder working 8 miles from Cardiff on a ship in Barry Docks. The murder was committed at 1:45 a.m. Abdullahi's alibi rested on a colleague who worked with him and says he saw him on board only 15 minutes before he was supposed to be in the murder flat in Cardiff.
I saw him between 11 to 11:30 on the Saturday evening. I worked with him during the evening at certain intervals. I left the ship at 1:30 a.m., which is the last time I saw him, and I left with a person called Ron Williams, who drove me home.
And what time did you get home?
about 2 o'clock.
Is there any doubt in your mind at all that A, you saw Abdullahi on the ship on the Coral Sea at 1:30 in the morning, and B, that it was Saturday?
There's no doubt at all.
Lawrence Mann checked his facts before giving evidence. Coincidentally, the chief alibi rebuttal witness was his friend Ronald Williams, whose evidence was believed by the jury. Both men worked several nights on the boat, and there was genuine confusion. But Ronald Williams stuck strongly to his story in court, claiming he'd seen Abdullahi in a pub in Cardiff shortly before the murder. But Mann recalled that it had rained heavily on the night, and he was right. Williams still insists he saw Abdullahi in a pub, but now admits it could easily have been another night, and this is not the only mistake he made. On December the 11th, you admitted making a mistake, and now, instead of going home with Lawrence Mann after the Custom House, you went with Mann to the North Star, where you said you saw Abdullahi.
That's correct.
Right? And you said, I'm absolutely positive about speaking to Dullah, that's Abdullahi, in a North Star club between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. on Sunday, the 14th of February. I am not mistaken.
That's correct, yes.
But you could be mistaken because you didn't go with Lawrence Mann, did you?
That's correct, yes.
You made a mistake on that.
I did indeed, yes.
And then, finally, on January the 12th, again, you told the police, I made a mistake, and it wasn't Lawrence Mann, I went with it was Peter Brook.
That's correct, yes.
Now, the point I want to make in all this, and thank you for being so honest about it, is that you made several genuine and I'm sure honest mistakes about where you were, who you were with, and where you went.
That's correct.
So you could be quite wrong in your final evidence.
Yes, I could be, yes. Could be. I stand by everything I said except for the date. But I've always said the same thing in court on the 2 occasions, that I could be mistaken about the day. I could also be mistaken about the time. It's going to be roughly around that time, but the day is obviously of importance. What the day was, I can't be 100% sure on, but I can be sure on the fact that I did speak to Dullah in the club.
Could have been a day earlier?
It could have been a day earlier, it could have been a day later. In actual fact, it could have been any time.
But there was another man who worked on the ship that night who's also in a position to help Abdullahi. Bryn Samuels, the ship's labourer, was interviewed by detectives, yet his important statement was not disclosed to Abdullahi's defence solicitors until after the trial. Had the prosecution revealed that statement, the court would have learned that Samuels could alibi Abdullahi from about 3 a.m. onwards. This means there was only 90 minutes for Abdullahi without a car to travel 8 miles in the rain, commit a murder, and travel 8 miles back.
And the next time I seen him, maybe about 3, I'm only guessing, mind. 3 in the morning, of course. And with him then till about the time we come home, till 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning.
When you saw him at about 3 o'clock, where was he?
We was all in the galley having tea.
Did you talk to him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What did you talk about?
Well, only small talk, football, beer, and all this, like, you know what I mean? Nothing of importance.
Did he talk like a man or look like a man who got off the ship between 12 and 3, committed a gruesome murder and got back on again?
No. As cool as a breeze. You know. That's the first thing you notice, like, you know what I mean? I'd probably ask him and say, what's the trouble? Like, what's the matter with you? Like, you're on edge and all this and that, but he wasn't. He seemed quite normal to me.
If Abdullahi's alibi is true, and if Miller's confession is deemed to be too coerced to be safe, that leaves the prosecution case against only one remaining defendant. Tony Paris spent his months on remand before the trial in Cardiff prison. The only evidence against him before he came here were the statements of Vilde and Pasila. Remarkably, Tony Paris found himself on the same prison landing as a notorious supergrass Ian Massey, who was serving 14 years for armed robbery. Massey later gave evidence that Paris had confessed the murder to him.
He's an organizer. He was a manipulator, you know. He knew what he was doing. Right from day one, he knew what he was doing.
What was his view about that very long sentence? I think he's still serving the 14 years.
Yeah, 14 years. Well, 14 years to anyone is a long time, innit? And I don't think anyone wants to do that, especially him.
Tony Ward was also on the same prison wing with Paris and Massey. He's certain that Massey's evidence against Paris was an attempt to frame him.
It was a fit-up, definitely. Like, I know Massey, I know him very well. I've done nearly 12 to 13 months with him. And that's a long time to know someone. I know his ins and outs. And in short, he is a liar. He is a liar. He'll do anything. He will do anything.
And do you really think that he would help frame a man for a murder he didn't commit?
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to see him to know it.
If Tony Ward is telling the truth, then the sum of the witness evidence against the three men leaves room for considerable doubt.
There are times when you say, well, we've got the wrong guy, or we don't have enough evidence against the right guy, we'll let him go and we'll keep on looking for the evidence, and if it comes, we'll bring him back again. But the one thing that you must not do, if you regard yourself as a professional policeman, is see it as some sort of defeat for you, professionally or in a credibility sense with your peers, that you don't get a conviction.
What forensic evidence does exist seems to point elsewhere. Mystery bloodstains were found on the wallpaper by Lynette White's body and on the legs of her jeans. This blood probably came from the killer's hand when it slipped down the knife as he was inflicting the deep wounds to the body. Yet the blood on the wall was found not to belong to any of the defendants.
The blood on the wall was tested by DNA profiling and showed that it did not come from anyone who it has been suggested was in the room at the time. Blood grouping tests on that indicated that the blood on the wall could have a common origin with the blood on the legs of the jeans. These two factors taken together clearly indicated the presence of another person, a man, who was injured at the time.
And a man who was not one of the defendants.
Indeed.
The judge in the trial was puzzled by this. He reminded the jury that there was still a problem over the unknown man whose blood it was, and asked why it was that he hadn't been named by Vilde or Pasila.
Now, dependent on which witness you believe, or which combination of witnesses you believe, anything between 5 and 9 people were in that room at any one time. Now, what the evidence did show is that none of those people were forensically connectable with that room. Not even Miller, who's alleged to have cut the girl's throat. But what was in that room was evidence against someone else. There was evidence of a palm print, there was evidence of a rare type of blood, which was nobody's blood of those that were arrested. So quite clearly, the outstanding, unanswered question here, and it's so important, is even if these people did do it, and I don't believe that they did, who did? Because whoever it was, he left his mark.
This is the pub from which Lynette White, Leanne Vilde and Angela Pasila operated. The mystery man who took part in the killing may have been a sixth man, or he may have been a man alone. The evidence of Mark Gromick, the other key prosecution witness, alleged that just before the murder, he let 4 men into the house, 2 of whom he described as defendants. This evidence was vital in corroborating the theory that several men had killed Lynette. Gromick lived directly above the murder room. Having let the men in, he said he also heard them shouting at Lynette seconds before she screamed as she was being stabbed.
Years ago, paddle steamers.
When Lynette White was killed, Paul Atkins was upstairs spending the night with Gromick. Atkins, like many of the witnesses, has several criminal convictions. He told contradictory stories in police statements and when giving evidence. Like Stephen Miller, he's a man of limited intelligence. However, since the murder, he's found a new stable relationship with another man, and for the last 4 years has stuck consistently to one version of what happened on that night. It wholly contradicts Gromick's account. Mark said in his statement that he said eventually that he heard people shouting downstairs, "Give me what I want, give me what I want, you fucking bitch." That kind of stuff, right, as I recall.
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
No, I didn't hear that. I
didn't hear any sound?
No, I saw it as a scream, and I heard saying, "No, I'm not going to pay for it." That's all I heard. "I'm not going to pay for it. I'm not paying for it," he said. That's all I heard. That's all I heard.
One voice?
Yeah, one voice. That's all I heard.
Atkins has nothing to gain from lying now. What he seems to know, and what he believes he knows, confirm the growing suspicions that only one man called on Lynette White that he was a client, and as the presence of the unused condom shows, she believed he was a client.
Yeah, the old metal irons.
Who do you think killed Lynette?
Who do I think? Myself. I think myself that one of the punters picked up Lynette, used Leon's flat, 7 James Street, and killed her. That's what I think to myself. But I don't know who killed her. Those boats are inside now, right? They have nothing to do with this case, I don't think.
Mark Gromick now lives in hiding in a new flat provided by the council and was reluctant to appear on camera. He's always maintained he spoke the truth, but has never talked about contradictions in his evidence at the murder trial.
Are you certain that you let those people in, or was it somebody else?
There was the 4 boys I mentioned at the door, and I mean, as I said, I turned, went back up the stairs and left them at the door. I mean, I left the door open.
Yes.
And as I got to the top of the first flight of stairs, I turned and I seen Abdullah walking.
But you told various versions of the story, didn't you? And your statements changed, and then you added to them. And one of the things I noticed when I was reading them again this morning is that on the 22nd of November, you didn't say anything about Leanne Vilde, and then you suddenly put Leanne in the frame on the 6th of December. Why was that? What happened between your first statement to the police and the second statement? Why did you change? Was it because they gave you information or what?
Who gave me information?
The police.
Well, no, I mean, they can't give me information about something that happened. I mean, they weren't there.
Mm. So why did you then change the statement? And why on the 6th of December suddenly did you add so much more to your statement from the 22nd of November? Because you kept adding to it. I mean, you didn't suddenly tell the truth, did you? You told it in bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I ain't got a reason, I don't suppose.
Thanks anyway.
One door shuts, others remain closed. Angela Pasila is equally shy. She continues her work as a prostitute from a pleasant new council flat.
Oh, is Angela there, please? My name's Tom Mangold. There are just a couple of questions I'd like to ask if I... But why don't you want to talk to us? Why don't you want to talk to us? All right. Thank you anyway, Miss Pasila. Thank you.
Like the other 2 key prosecution witnesses, Miss Pasila is maintaining her silence. At the close of the trial, one defence barrister called this a topsy-turvy case, pointing out there was actually more evidence linking the 3 prosecution witnesses to the murder than there was linking the accused men to the murder. We may never know what really happened inside Lynette White's flat on the night of the murder, unless that is the so-called 6th man is found. 2 weeks ago, South Wales CID, with the full approval of the Crown Prosecution Service, suddenly reopened what everyone believed had been a closed case. They too have shown a renewed interest in the ubiquitous white suspect who was never identified. Meanwhile, a royal commission appointed after several recent miscarriages of justice is currently taking evidence from lawyers who wish to further strengthen the PACE regulations. They want to give individuals who find themselves innocently hurled into the eye of a stormy murder investigation further rights and safeguards.
I'm not that bad. I'm not that bad. You know, I'm not a bad person. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know. So I mean, why they want me off the street the rest of my life? I don't know. I'd love to know why. You know. I'd like to know all those reasons. One day they'll come out. They'll come out. And everybody will know. Everybody.
While the law may continue to seek out the truth of this case, there is no perfect system that separates the innocent from the guilty. What the Cardiff case may yet confirm is the oldest legal axiom of all, that it is more important to acquit the innocent than convict the guilty.